Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Data Unchained podcast. I'm your host, Molly Presley. Before we introduce today's guest, let me talk just a little bit about what this podcast is all about, especially for those of you who maybe have not listened before. The paradigm for data access has changed a lot over the last few years, even over the last few decades, of course. We've had the advent of the cloud, edge computing, sensor data. Then during COVID, the workforce started to move more remotely. And this is all happening simultaneously with data becoming a really valuable enterprise asset. In today's decentralized world, getting the data to those remote workers, to distributed applications, moving it across cloud regions is really a challenge. And Data Unchained digs into both the challenges as well as the solutions and how to make your data an asset as a global resource. Today's guest fits firmly in the center of this conversation. Tim Tutt is the co-founder and CEO of NightShift Development. Tim, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Molly. Glad to be here.
So congratulations on founding a company. That's something a lot of us would love to aspire to do and don't have the courage. Tell us a little bit about what caused you to, what problem were you looking to solve with NightShift, and what kind of work do you guys do over there?
Absolutely. Yeah, when we started NightShift, I have a long career building large-scale search and discovery solutions, primarily in the federal government space. One of my prior jobs was to actually help organizations kind of find the needles in the haystacks of their data. So I was kind of playing middleman between my end users and their data, where they would come to me, ask questions, I go run queries against a supercomputer, come back, give them answers, just wash, rinse, repeat cycle. What really boiled down to was, I felt like we were playing too much in the middle as engineers, and we needed to give people better access to their data. So myself and my co-founder kind of took a big step back and said, well, we should build a solution to solve that problem. And that's really what we're doing. The core of our offerings is a core product called ClearQuery that's designed to make data analytics super simple for any user, no matter their technical skill level.
Okay, cool. So how long has this company been around? Is it new? Have you been around for a bit?
We've been around for about 6.5 years now. So
okay.
Coming up on the better side of a decade.
Nice. And how have things changed since the initial inception of what drove you to founding the company? And, in my world, I think about, there's been a massive surge in like data science and data engineering with the rise of companies like Databricks. Then there's been, of course, can't talk about data without talking about AI today. How has the market been shifting over the last 6 years, and maybe your offering as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we started, I think we were one of the very few players in town that had a product that was designed around this conversational analytics experience. These days, especially with OpenAI and ChatGPT, you're starting to see a lot more of that across the board. We do have some, differentiators, and what it's kind of done is driven our product development cycle to, run a bit faster, so we stay ahead of the curve. We operate behind firewalls. You don't have to send your data to third-party APIs. And, because we work a lot in government customer spaces and have government customers, that privacy and security is a core crux of what we kind of focus on in terms of how people get access to their data. Handful of other features that we have to build to kind of, stay competitive with our other competitors out there as well.
So you mentioned when we were chatting ahead of time that you're over in Tyson's Corner. Is government the key focus for your solution, or is that just happenstance because of where you're located?
A little happenstance because of where we're located, but also, a big driver because that's where we started and where we grew up. We started started working in the intelligence community. We knew how to sell back into those spaces, so that's where we started here.
Interesting. And I think that, getting into government and having the appropriate security and technology and everything to do that is difficult. That's a kind of starting at the hardest corner case and then moving broader is great. And not to say government's a corner case, but they definitely have very stringent requirements. So that speaks to at least the security of your product, which in any of these data initiatives is a huge deal for anyone getting started.
Absolutely. And it was definitely, a very intentional decision on our part, because we did know, how hard it was to operate in government. We knew that was an area that we could focus on to start.
So would a secret organization, whoever that might be, a three-star letter agency, leverage you all as their language-based models for AI, or kind of talk a little bit more before we jump into the topics we actually said we were going to talk about how people use you. Maybe give a example of a deployment without naming names.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a large part, a lot of our government customers are leveraging us for analyzing the mass amounts of data that they have. So looking for things like, hey, what's the pattern of life of an individual? Or even looking a little bit more broadly at, hey, how are we using funds across operational resources? And how should we really be changing how we're investing in the future on those types of things? So the use cases span pretty broadly. It really boils down to the core data that the customer has. We've got everything from standard HR cases to understand attrition within an organization, all the way to your more operational use cases for finding out where our forces should be moving across the board.
Okay. And in your earlier discussion, you mentioned that you help non-technical users get value from their data. What is the interface? What does that look like? Is it a conversational language model, or is it something else?
Yeah, so the interface, it's a web-based interface. One of the core features is that conversational analytics piece, which is a web application that allows you to ask a question in natural language. Hey, how many times was Putin mentioned in the last 30 days? Ask that question in natural language, and you'll get back a visualization kind of showing you the answer to your question. That's really where we started, but we also have a number of other features. So it's a combination of conversational analytics, but then we have automated insights, which will automatically push data to you based on things that are interesting across that data. We have a feature called relationship discovery that allows you to kind of see interesting connection between individuals, who's talking to who, how those individuals are interacting. And then one of our big things that we really focus on is how you tell the stories with that data. Our Insights Canvas feature is really designed around, hey, here's how you report out that information in a very, very effective way. So you're not just dashboard with lots of KPIs that no one really knows how to dig through, but you have a meaningful report that you can present to your end users at the end of the day.
Very cool. What is the model? Does the product run in the cloud and you have to get data up into the cloud? Do you have a hybrid model? Can you talk a little bit about where you run and where the data sits?
Absolutely. So we've designed ClearQuery from the start to run behind firewall, and also in any cloud. So we can deploy in Amazon, in Azure, in Google Cloud, or we can deploy on your own bare metal. The data will sit on in your firewall, in your ecosystem, wherever you want it. But we also have a SaaS model. So you can go and just upload your data into our cloud. We use Amazon as our backend data store today. But really just depends on the use case for that customer. Again, because we had those government customers, being able to be flexible in our deployment model was excessively important from the start.
Can you dig a little bit more into the type of data you're working with? Is it anything structured, unstructured? Is it videos and images? Kind of talk a little bit more about the types of data you have the tools to analyze.
Sure. Yeah. So today, the short answer is it's structured and semi-structured data. And when I say semi-structured, we'll take unstructured text as a complement. So if you have, for instance, emails, you'll have the body of an email message plus the metadata around it, to, from, and those types of things. But generally, structured data is where we're going to operate best. On our future roadmap, we are looking at ways to analyze more unstructured files, things like audio, video, and image analysis. That's going to require a lot more processing power. And what we really want to do is kind of keep this as simple as possible for the broadest set of users. So connecting to a standard SQL data store is going to be, where we'll shine, or connecting to your data sitting in Elasticsearch, which is usually our core backend data source. So Structured and semi-structured data is, usually the short answer to that question. But longer term, we are looking at ways to ingest unstructured content in a way that allows you to do structured analysis on it.
And can you work with multiple data sources, or do you try to have it all sitting in one silo or database, however you might describe it, depending on the customer environment?
Yep. So we do use Elasticsearch as our core backend data store, but you can pull in data from multiple data sources. So we try to avoid the whole data warehouse concept. Usually you want to focus on a particular data source, but you also want to have these abilities to kind of search across everything. So one of the big problems that most organizations have, and it's definitely a problem in government spaces, data silos all over the place. So we do have a feature built in called cross dataset search that'll search across all of your different data sets so that you know where you need to look to find the things that matter to you.
Yeah, it's funny, and it's probably not appropriate really for this conversation, but in the guests that we've had on Data Unchained, there's been a lot of conversation with the data science, data engineering folks of, is ETL really the way of the future, or is there a way to simplify and make things more streamlined? And is it ELT, or does that not exist? It's interesting though, like there's a lot of acronyms out there, and the ways that we've solved this in the past with a data scientist extracting, transforming, loading, or do you do data warehouses? There's a lot of confusion out there. So I think, for the folks in this show, especially, I think it's largely senior management people thinking about their data strategies. What's your perspective, with your experience of how should the data architecture be set up to make it most efficient and to use your tools best?
Broadly, having clean structured data is excessively important from the beginning. So, the extract, transform, load is usually the model that we tend to operate on. That's going to be, you're going to get the best value from ClearQuery using that way. And I think you'll get the best value from most analytic tools that way. I mean, at the end of the day, the short answer is you have garbage in, you're going to have garbage out. And that's really what we want to avoid. It's funny because that is one of the use cases that we tend to get from data engineers and data scientists is they get a new data set. They'll use ClearQuery's automated insights capability to try to identify, hey, here's where this data is dirty. This thing is showing me that I have 110 states in this particular field, but I know there are actually only 50 states. Oh, we have upper lowercase versions of this. Maybe we just need to normalize that data a little bit more. So we're trying to help evolve that process of getting clean data in over the long term here. And that's actually one of the things that we've got on our roadmap is, hey, how do we help with that process as data's coming into your system?
Do you have a consulting practice on helping? Here's the types of things we recommend as far as cleaning your data, the hygiene before putting it into NightShift. Kind of what's the consultative bit of your business, if any?
We always have some bit of consulting as we're operating deploy ClearQuery. In large part, it really boils down to helping people build the right data strategy so that they can get the most value out of their data. So usually as we're deploying ClearQuery, we're helping them to understand, here's what you need to do to make this the most valuable. Here's what you need to do to get the right answers so that you can make the best decisions with your data. That usually comes with ClearQuery, we're helping you walking through and providing kind of a solutions architect to help look at your overall system and determine what makes the best sense and where do we fit in that picture to help you tell the whole story there. So it's not pure consulting, but it's product-based consulting.
Kind of best practices and how to ensure success once with the data in your platform.
That's right. And also
sense.
Even before it's in the platform, here's how you ensure success along the way.
Perfect. And I think that ties nicely into talking a little bit about the data movement. I know you use connectors to like SQL connectors. The data, once it's placed within NightShift, does it live there forever, or is it a second copy that's living there that you delete afterwards? Kind of where is the data living once your product is deployed?
Yeah, so once the product's deployed, the data is living inside of an Elasticsearch instance, and that doesn't necessarily reside with us. We don't always have access to things, and that, again, part of our overall deployment strategy, make this super easy for people to be able to deploy the most sensitive data they have without having to worry about some third party having access to it, being able
Okay.
to ask these questions without having to worry about sending your sensitive data to a third party. So, and in government, that becomes excessively important because you're talking air gapped environments. They can't send data out to begin with. So the data store is Elasticsearch at the end of the day, but that is deployed wherever the customer lives. So if they're
So
deployed
that's
behind
their
firewall,
Amazon instances and their environment. Got it. Got
that's
it.
correct.
It makes perfect sense, especially with the more secure customers. But I think everyone's worried about data security today. So that makes a lot of
Absolutely.
sense.
Absolutely. I think you saw in the commercial space, months ago when OpenAI first rolled out, several companies were had issues of data leakages,
Hmm.
where sensitive company information was being leaked out through ChatGPT, and that became a big concern for individuals. So yeah, I think even in the commercial market space, it's a major concern as well.
As you think about the analytics you can pull from your environment, I think all of us are starting to understand the power of generative AI and updating models and updating them with your own data sets. Is there an analog in Night Shift to how generative AI is working?
Yeah. So, with conversational analytics for us, what we actually take the approach of is intent understanding, figuring out, what it is that a user means when they ask a particular question, doing a little bit of entity extraction and building that query to kind of go and fish that data out of the data set and then figure out how to display that to a user. So that's kind of where we started, and that's where we've kind of honed in, our core focus. One of the things that we're investigating now is we don't want to leverage large language models because they're usually too resource intensive. They usually take, total cost of ownership for a customer becomes, pretty dramatic. And we definitely don't want to use external APIs because that provides limitations for who we can provide the same value to in general. So what we are looking at is, hey, are there smaller language models that we can use and embed inside of our capability for things like entity extraction, language translation, or even question answering in a focus set where, I start with an initial analytical question, but maybe I want to get some extra value out of a small set of documents. I've got a document that describes, I don't know, maybe it's that describes the weather patterns in a particular area in Tyson's Corner, Virginia during the winter months, and I want to ask something like what's the lowest temperature in that time space, but it's all formatted in a unstructured text document. Being able to extract the value from those types of questions in unstructured text as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing from some R&D on internally today.
And I like this kind of model where customer is working with you and then there's new questions, new types of models they want to leverage, and you are continually updating that within your platform. How do you decide which types of models to add, where to invest the next step? Is that really customer driven? Or are you watching market trends and say, no, this is super interesting, let's add this? How when your customers have invested in the technology, how do they know what the roadmap will be for the new insights they'll be able to gather?
Yeah, I'll say it's a little of all of the above, but it is primarily customer driven. We are a bootstrap company, so we have no outside investors. So everything we do is very much so based on our current and existing customers and what their needs are in general. That said, as we're going out to market, as we're looking at overall market trends, we also try to bring some of those innovative insights into, hey, here's something that you may not be thinking about, but we think can be valuable for you based on what we understand your use case to be.
Okay. Your comment earlier about the expense of running a large language model is an interesting one. And it's obvious, I guess, now that I think about it, but I hadn't thought about that before.
Hmm.
So are you targeting smaller organizations, or are you finding that even the really big ones, the big, three-letter agencies just don't have that much budget? Like, where is cost coming into play right now in the discussions you're having with folks?
Yeah, I mean, you tend to find we are targeting, across the board. So, small and large organizations, and we have a pricing model that fits that. So, depending on the data volume you have, we can, help and adjust based on those types of things. You'll scale horizontally instead of, scaling in a very exponential fashion, even for smaller data sets. Um, Cost really does play a big factor, especially when it comes to infrastructure. So the infrastructure for running any platforms, whether that is some core database or a large language model, is significant. I think if you look at OpenAI, part of the reason they had that $10 billion investment from Microsoft was to run all of the infrastructure they needed to collect and source all of the data that they had. There are definitely companies out there now that are building language models that you can run on smaller infrastructure, but it still requires GPUs, which are still pretty cost intensive. So even if you're running in a cloud infrastructure, that's going to drive up your cost overall.
So, Tim, I found your comment earlier speaking to the cost of large language models insightful. I think a lot of us are thinking more about how to use them and not necessarily the cost of spinning everything up. Of course, a lot of folks are trying to budget right now for that. So give me a feel for, are you targeting smaller organizations who won't ever have access to large language models? Or is it the large organizations who don't have their arms around budget yet? Kind of how is cost playing into these decisions right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we kind of target up and down that stream. So our model is designed so that we can target the smaller organizations, but scale up to larger organizations as their data volume grows. Now, one of the biggest challenges with language models and deploying and running your own is the infrastructure required to do so. You're usually needing GPUs, which are expensive on their own, and the amount of processing power and number of servers that you need, it depends on the size of that language model that you're actually using. Then you add on to that how many users are going to be hitting that system. So you need to be able to support that. I think we all remember the early days of OpenAI where it was crashing every other day when people were using ChatGPT, and it was just because they did not have enough infrastructure for that. There are a lot of companies now that are building more purpose-specific language models that you can run, but it's still going to cost more than a lot of organizations are willing or able to pay right now. So I think that's going to be a bigger challenge, but we'll see over the next 6 to 9 months, I imagine, a more gradual shift towards smaller, more purpose-built language models so that people can actually leverage those on their own environments.
So, Tim, I think that everything you've been talking about should be very interesting to a lot of the listeners here to this show. How do people get started? Do you have a trial offering? Kind of maybe just talk a little bit about onboarding a new customer and how to reach out to you guys to connect and learn more.
Absolutely. So the easiest way to find us is on clearquery.io. That's our website. Couple of ways to get started. We have a free SaaS tier, so you can actually get started with a small data set, test it out, try it on your own there. But you can also reach out to our team, and there are plenty of buttons on the website for you to get in touch with us so we can talk about specific use cases. If you have something that's a little bit more sensitive, it's behind firewall, or you'd like a more customer tailored demo.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences as well as the technology with us today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, thanks much for having me, Molly. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.